You ever been in one of those conversations where it seems like you're saying something extremely important, and the other person that you're having the conversation with is also saying something extremely important? And while you can't really make out what it is that you're arguing about, you're both very passionate, very vehement about your ideas. In fact, you're so convinced that your idea is right, and they are so convinced that their idea is right, that this is getting louder and louder by the moment. But what you haven't realized is you're making the same point. If you've ever been in one of those conversations, it takes a third party, an outsider, to point out that you both actually agree you're saying the same thing a different way. But what really happens in leadership skirmishes is a struggle for that power, that authority, that position, that opportunity to influence others through those same kinds of conversations. And sometimes they're intentional. That's what I want to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders podcast. I don't know if you've had the opportunity, like I did a few years back, on a long drive. It was a 24-hour single one-way drive. And as we made the drive, I listened to 5 people in the vehicle having a conversation. And it was ironic to me the number of times that I would hear party A make a very bold statement, and then party B make a very bold statement, and party C make a very bold statement. And I would realize maybe 2 or 3 minutes into their conversation about these statements that they were talking about 3 totally different things. And I don't just mean analogies and allegories. I mean the concepts that they were illustrating were 3 different concepts, 3 totally different ideas. Now, that wouldn't normally be a problem, except that the intention of the conversation was to come to a conclusion about what's the best way to address that particular issue, that problem, that idea. Now, it's common for people to have a misunderstanding about a topic or a subject. It's common for people to see the same idea 2 different ways. What's the best way to mow the yard? Is it the square around the outside, or is it the stripes back and forth? Or is it at an angle so when the neighbors drive by, they see from one direction all the perfectly straight little rows, but from the other direction it looks like that grass just cuts itself miraculously. See, you could argue over that all day long, and if you own a landscaping business, that could actually be a business decision. And it might be, in some people's realm, a really big deal. But if you give your lawnmower to your 10-year-old and say, mow the front lawn, it doesn't even come up. See, it could be, to some people, a business decision. This is a major concept. We've really got to nail this down and get it right. And for others, they couldn't care less. Maybe you've been involved in the last couple of years in conversations around, politics or healthcare or vaccinations or whatever else, where it seems to be the same thing. For some people, this is a really big deal, and for other people, they really couldn't care less. The challenge that we're going to face in the coming years is a challenge where the conversation itself, just the idea of having a conversation, will be attacked. Now, how do I know? Because the attacks are already underway. There are certain phrases, concepts, products, services that if you just mention the name of the product or the service, you might be completely canceled from your social media account. You might think that's an exaggeration. It is not. Do some research. You'll find it. There are certain things that could be used to treat certain diseases that if you mention those things by name, you lose the flow of your account, you lose the traction, and the algorithm comes after your exposure in your videos and all kinds of stuff. In fact, even if you're the expert who invented the thing that is combating the thing, the expert themselves, the inventor themselves, could be completely removed from the conversation. Leadership skirmishes happen in small conversations. Little tiny conversations around the water cooler can change the outcome of a company. Could redirect who gets appointed as CEO next. Could redirect what sales product or service is going to hit the streets next. Trust me, it's those little bitty conversations that to some are as irrelevant as which direction you mow the lawn. But to others, they are industry-shaking, world-shaking, global conversations. Now here's the challenge for many leaders. Many leaders get caught up in the notion that if it's not important to me, if I can't put my finger on why this is an important conversation, product, service, discussion, then I'm just going to stay out of it. There's a word for that. In fact, it's a homonym, and it's a homonym that has a drastically different meaning. Here's the word, seed. Now, on the one side, you might think seed, S-E-E-D, like you're going to plant a tree that later will become an orchard, and so planting that one seed could change everything. Yes, true. But by not engaging in the conversation, you have the other kind of seed, not something planted that will later harvest. You have the C-E-D-E, which comes with the word concede, to give up, to give away, to hand over. And in those conversations that are so critical, the ones that in one sense are a business decision that could change the outcome of your business, and in another sense to other people are absolutely irrelevant. When you refuse to engage in those conversations, you seed the ground. You don't seed the ground to later become a harvest. No, you seed the ground as in giving up the territory. And when you seed the ground, when you give up the territory, when you refuse to engage in the argument, because from your perspective it's irrelevant, you have no idea how much you lose. Now sometimes, a great strategist will look down the road of a conversation that hasn't taken place yet. And they'll jump ahead of you. And they will seed, S-E-E-D, the territory before you get there. It would be like in World War II, when there was a stretch of land that the enemy knew would one day become a big deal as a battleground. And so they would go in and dig holes and seed the ground with explosive devices. We now call them IEDs. Back then they called them mines, but they were intended, like the Bouncing Betty, to destroy people. Oh, the ground was seeded long before. And by that I don't mean given up. I mean things were planted in the ground because they knew you were coming. See, there are people who are doing that right now in rhetoric. They're doing it right now in conversations. They're doing it to those who would be leaders in the next generation, those who are coming up in politics, those who are coming out of colleges. There are conversations being had now where certain words and phrases are being planted like landmines to become triggers later. Oh yeah, right now, you're not paying any attention to it because you're thinking, I'm 24 years old, I'm just about to get my bachelor's or my master's degree, and I really don't care yet because it's not that big a deal. But 2 to 3 to 5 years from now, that one phrase, that one ideology, that one vote when you were in college, that one rally you attended, that one election day that you celebrated, could be the end of your career. I'm not exaggerating. I'm pointing out a reality that we've got to learn to deal with. And as leaders, as these verbal skirmishes come up, these battles over words, this territorial fight for the influence of a nation which influences the world. There's a reason America is called a superpower, because the influence that America has all over the world is tremendous. The decisions that our healthcare industries make, the decisions that our automakers make, the decisions that our energy industry leaders make, those decisions impact global economies. Well, and it's part of the reason that the World Economic Forum right now is trying to change the way America makes those decisions. It's the reason that some of the language has been seeded, S-E-E-D. It's been seeded with words that right now seem innocuous, that 5 years ago You didn't hear them in conversation maybe once or twice a decade. And now they're the common rhetoric, but they have a different meaning than they did when they were put in the dictionary. See, those kind of conversations, those are the ones that leaders have to be very aware of. Leaders have to be very aware that someone is planting something in a conversation you haven't yet had that will come back to bite you. They're planning for you to say something that they disagree with. And having laid the groundwork ahead of time, they're baiting you into a conversation that will later become a trap. They're baiting you into an argument, into a word battle, into an ideological battle that you don't know is a battle. Maybe you've heard the old phrase, you're foolish if you bring a knife to a gunfight. Or you're also foolish if you show up to a battle that you didn't know was a battle. If you show up in a place where you thought this was a friendly conversation and it turns out, nope, this is an argument, where the outcome of the argument could be the difference in the liveliness of your career, of your political career, your financial career, your relational career, or maybe even your freedom. Oh yeah, there are people today who are being locked up because ideas that they hold are counter to those who are currently in leadership. I'm not joking. Do your homework. There are people who have been detained now for multiple months in unsavory places with no trial, with no proof of guilt, with no conviction by a jury of their peers, which our Constitution affords every living person in our country. No, those things haven't happened. But because of their ideologies, because of the words that came out of their mouth, because of some of the things that they believe, these leadership skirmishes have taken place. And the ground that has been ceded, C-E-D-E, given up, handed over, walked away from, because of an ideological conflict that was too intense for them at the moment. They have been trapped by ground that has been ceded, S-E-E-D, with ideas that are contrary to our nation's founding. I know this seems like a really big conspiratorial bubble. It's not. I'm trying to give you a heads up. As someone who listens closely to the words and the meanings of the people on every side of the camp, I study conversations as far back as I can get them in rhetoric. Communication coaching is what I do for a living. This is my most important asset, the ability to perceive what people are truly saying, not just the words coming out of their mouth. And I'm telling you right now, there are people setting up for a battle that you don't see as a battle. The snare is being set. The words are being used in the media right now that will trap you, that will catch you off guard as a leader. Imagine those people. I'll use this final illustration as I close. Imagine those people who 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 25 years ago rose through the ranks from the mailroom to the CEO corner office. And along the way, they did what most humans do. Sometime in their college days, they acted like an idiot. Sometime in their early career, they said some things that were unsavory. And while forgiven and moved on, and apologies were made, and recompense perhaps was even made 2 decades ago. Today, those words are being held against them. Those ideas that they expressed 20 years ago are taking them out of their leadership position today. Why? Well, not because they still hold those ideas, but because other ideas they hold are unsavory for those who have the power to manipulate what you said 20 years ago. Now, I don't know anyone. I don't know anyone over 20 years old who hasn't made a mistake in their life. I don't know anybody over 20 days old who hasn't made a mistake in their life at some point. But those of us who have more than 20 years behind our belt, 2 decades ago, we were different people. 3 decades ago, we were certainly different people. And for many people who are leading today, those ideas, some bad ones that carried forward, need to be purged. And some of those good ideas need to be held up. But none of them get the chance when the ground that's been ceded, C-E-D-E, given up, handed over, left, and abandoned to say, not my problem, not my monkeys, not my circus. Those problems are coming back because others have seeded the ground with words meant to trap you. Oh, they're looking for you to expose ideas that you held 20 or 30 years ago. They're looking to find them on your Twitter feed. They're looking to find them in your background, in old past arguments, because they know that you're an influence right now and you're in the way. Now, if you think I'm kidding about these things, do some research on CEOs who've left their position in the last 2 years. Do some research on people who were maybe military commanders, maybe heads of hospitals, who've left their post over things that they've said, not things they've done wrong, things that they said that disagreed with certain political and leadership positions today. They're coming for you too. If you lead, they're coming for you. You know, there are states in our nation right now who believe that parents don't have the right to decide what books their children read. It's not the parents' call whether or not the kids read those books. That should be decided by the state, or so says the state. The battle for leadership, those skirmishes, they're going to be in words and ideas, and it's going to get more and more common and more frightening. Are you ready to stand your ground? Have you determined your core values? Have you laid out clearly what you believe in a way that you can articulate it? Have you made your final decision on many of the stances that you've taken all your life? Have you reconsidered some? Now's a really good time to do that. The next coming months, this battle is going to get more intense. And I challenge you as a leader to make sure that you know where you stand so that you're ready to stand. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.